Welcome to the Planet Trillion Trees podcast. I'm Eva Monheim.
And I'm Hal Rosner. We are both certified arborists through the International Society of Arboriculture. The purpose of our podcast is to encourage tree planting and proper tree care for our urban forests, which include neighborhoods, parks, and other open spaces.
We will also cover a myriad of tree topics, including the important role trees play in relationship to the climate crisis. Thank you for joining us. The Planet Trillion Trees podcast is happy to announce that we have won 2 Garden Communicator International Silver Laurel Medal Awards for Best Podcast and Best Podcast Episode. We've also won a Garden Communicators International Gold Laurel Medal Award for a Best Podcast Episode. We'd like to thank Garden Communicators for their recognition.
Verdant Earth Educators provides dynamic in-person training and online learning opportunities for environmental and horticultural businesses. Owned by ISA-certified arborists and former university faculty, the Verdant Earth Educator team provides consultations on tree care and recommends climate-resilient opportunities for your valued green spaces. Verdant Earth Educators is all about seeding knowledge for success. Find Verdant Earth Educators at verdanteartheducators.com.
Monheim Microphones designs and handcrafts top-tier studio microphones and preamps right here in the United States in Hollywood, California. Their incredible line of innovative microphones and designs are used around the world by everyone from podcasters to top-charting record producers and singers. Monheim Microphones, unparalleled excellence. MonheimMicrophones.com. This podcast is being recorded on October 4th, 2024. Dan Lambe has committed nearly 2 decades of work to helping solve some of the biggest issues facing people and the planet through trees. After being named CEO in 2022 after 19 years in leadership roles at the Arbor Day Foundation, Lambe launched an initiative to accelerate the nonprofit's impact by planting 500 million trees, with a focus in forests and neighborhoods with the greatest need. Lambe is a trusted thought leader in the sustainable forestry space, and he regularly speaks at conferences hosted by the United Nations, Sustainable Brands, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and other high-profile industry events where trees and climate intersect. Lambe is also frequently used as a resource for top news outlets and has been featured on the Weather Channel, CNN, The Washington Post, Associated Press, Time, Forbes, Inc. magazine, and NPR. Lambe is the author of the book, Now is the Time for Trees, and even helped set a Guinness World Record for the most people watering trees simultaneously. Welcome to the Planet Trillion Trees podcast, Dan. We're delighted that you could be with us today.
Great to be with you.
How did you wind up getting to the Arbor Day Foundation, and what's a little bit of your backstory? We love backstories.
Well, no problem. It is a long backstory. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is the home of our headquarters. And as a child growing up in Lincoln, my parents are tree planters. They instilled the tree planter ethic in me and my siblings. We were tree planters. We were nature enthusiasts. My parents really instilled that in us. And every year we would drive to Nebraska City, Nebraska, which is the home of Arbor Day, about an hour from Lincoln, Nebraska, to pick apples in the orchards of Arbor Day Farm and visit the historic home of J. Sterling Morton, the founder of Arbor Day. And I've got pictures of my family and me doing that as a child. And then almost 20 years ago, I got a call from an old friend who said, hey, you got to come back to Lincoln, Nebraska and work for the Arbor Day Foundation. And I was like, what? My wife and I were living in Austin, Texas, loving it. Never thought we'd move back to Lincoln, Nebraska. Never wanted to move back to Lincoln, Nebraska, but just could not pass up this opportunity to go home and work for an organization like the Arbor Day Foundation. And it has just been fantastic. It's a really positive organization with amazing partners and team members. So sorry for the long story, but it really started with my upbringing in Nebraska, the home of Arbor Day. And I'm really proud to be here now at the Arbor Day Foundation.
I just have to say that I got goosebumps when you were telling me the story coming back home. I used to get trees from Arbor Day, Sterling Morton's Arbor Day, at home when I was a child. And I would send away, and it was like when that package arrived, my parents say, "What kind of trees did you get?" And it was like a crab apple, a dogwood, those kind of things. And I was always so excited. I couldn't wait for the package to arrive. So I was hooked in early on. So I can relate to where you're coming from.
I love you sharing that story. We hear those stories a lot. That's one of the things we try to do. We try and lower the barrier of entry for people to be a part of tree planting. And we do send out a lot of trees to our members and folks who buy trees from us. It gets harder and harder to do as the climate is changing, people's expectations for what they should get in the mail, how quickly it's harder and harder to do. But it's one of our favorite things because helping people get their hands dirty and plant trees is just so important. And so we still do it. We still work really hard to do it in the right way. And thanks for sharing that story. We love hearing those stories.
So we want to hear a little bit about the mission of the Arbor Day, but let me hit you with one more question. What in your background, academically or otherwise, got you to the position that you're at today in terms of leading this fantastic organization?
So I studied political science in college. Had I known there was so much science in political science, I never would have done that. And I would not do it again. It was a good, I loved my classmates. I loved my professors, but communications was really more of a natural thing for me. And so what I mean by communications is the opportunity to tell the story, to try and inspire people to be a part of the work we do together. So my entire career has been in nonprofit work, helping to raise money, build programs, do communications work. And so all of that together did uniquely put me with some unique experiences to come home again to work for the Arbor Day Foundation to try and inspire people to plant, nurture, and celebrate trees.
Which is the mission of the foundation.
Absolutely. Yes, that is our mission. It is a very simple mission. It is about inspiring people to plant, nurture, and celebrate trees. And it's all three of those key words. Of course, it's planting, and then it is nurturing. It isn't just about planting and walking away. As you know very well, we've got to care for those trees, prune them, manage them to make sure that they survive and thrive and bring all the benefits we want them to bring. And then it's also about celebrating. And that's one of my favorite parts of the work we do at the Arbor Day Foundation is shining a spotlight on the value of trees and the champions of tree planters and tree stewards. It's that celebration piece, that opportunity to make sure that we're not just these humble foresters working in the dark of night, but that we are telling the world about just how important trees are today. So that is part of our job. And that's the mission of the foundation. And we have planted millions and millions of trees over the years with our members, with our partners. And we are just really grateful for the chance to advance that simple but important mission.
I just have to say something here when you were saying nurturing. I drive past this little park area, and they had put in trees a couple years ago. Only one took. The rest of them, they just never came and took care of them. They kept posts on, and I think to myself, they didn't get the part of the nurturing.
Yeah, true.
They didn't get the Arbor Day message.
Yeah, it's so important. I don't have to tell you just how important it is and how to convince individuals, homeowners, how to convince cities, how to convince anyone who's managing a forest of any type that it is a living, breathing thing that needs to be cared for in order for it to bring all those countless benefits to us.
And then historically, the Arbor Day Foundation got its start in 1972. And maybe you could explain that a little bit, because you mentioned that Morton started Arbor Day, and maybe that's where some of the confusion is that we thought
you bet, Hal.
Yeah.
So Arbor Day was founded in 1872 in Nebraska City because there weren't trees in Nebraska. From the early on, it wasn't just about celebrating trees. It was a functional holiday. People wanted trees because they wanted fence posts. They want to live in homes built of sod. They need nuts and berries and all the benefits that trees bring. And so that's when Arbor Day was started, 1872 in Nebraska. On the 100th anniversary of the very first Arbor Day, a lot of leaders in Nebraska were looking for how are we going to celebrate the 100th anniversary, but do something bigger than Nebraska. Of course, it had already become a national holiday. But so the Arbor Day Foundation was started in 1972, very humble beginnings. And we have grown now to be the largest nonprofit membership organization in the world dedicated to planting trees. We have hundreds of thousands of members all across the country. We are planting trees in more than 50 countries around the world. And we are working with some of the biggest corporate brands. We work with everyone from the U.S. Forest Service to the United Nations Food and Ag Organization. We are fortunate to have amazing partners who help us advance our mission. And we've planted more than 500 million trees in our first 50 years, and we're on our path to the next 500 million trees and helping people understand how to nurture and how to care for trees and how to celebrate them.
Can I ask you, how do you just determine what trees you're going to be growing in your nursery?
Sure. So we have a nursery in Nebraska City at Arbor Day Farm. If you've never been to Arbor Day Farm in Nebraska City, put it on your list. It is a bucket list opportunity for tree planters, for tree advocates. It's 300 acres of trails and orchards and just lessons and history. But we have a small nursery there, but we work with nurseries all around the country and all around the globe. We're always trying to locally source seeds. We're always trying to locally source trees every chance we get. And we oftentimes lean on our city partners and our forestry partners to be locally sourcing those trees as best we can. Now, for the trees that we send out to our members, we are sourcing a lot of those in Tennessee, but even then we're trying, based on what we're sending and where we're sending, we try to as closely locally source those trees as we can. Tennessee is a unique ecosystem for growing trees. And if you've ever been to the McMinnville, Tennessee area, it's the mecca of tree nurseries. And so we do source a lot of trees from there, but we source trees from all over the place based on type, based on where those trees are going. We're always trying to make sure we're sending the right tree to the right hardiness zones. So it's a real combination, Eva. But again, I mentioned our partners. We rely on those partners to help us figure out what are the right trees, the right sources, the right seed supply, et cetera.
That's great. That's good to hear.
It's quite a puzzle. It's quite a puzzle, I will tell you.
I can imagine.
And we get no shortage of feedback from people about what we're sending, how we're sending it, all that kind of stuff. And that's okay. We get it. We just try and remind everybody it's green side up when you're putting it in the ground to have best chance for survival.
A real reliance on crowdsourcing, one might say.
Right.
You know, it's really interesting because I get a lot of plants through the mail for trial. And it's the packaging that people look at. And when they get the package and they're like, wow, look at this package. How do I go about unwrapping it? Because, you know, there's so much care in packing a tree. People don't realize it.
Absolutely. And we sell some larger trees, which include potted. We also send bare root trees. And bare root can be really confusing to people because it can be great for the success of the tree, but it can also be underwhelming sometimes when it arrives at your doorstep because it looks like a twig. It can thrive, but anyway.
So before we get too farther into this, we want to talk about the conference coming up in Chicago in November. And we're also going to be able to turn this interview around pretty quickly so that our listeners are going to get a good opportunity to book their tickets or take the train or however they'd like to get to Chicago for November 18 to 21. But tell us about the Partners in Community Forestry conference coming up. It sounds fantastic, and I'm looking forward to being there as well.
So it was over 15 years ago, we realized there's all these different key communities that are part of the urban and community forestry community. There's researchers, there's federal government, state government, cities, local nonprofits, electric utilities, tree care industry. They're all kind of having their own conferences and their own convenings. And so we said, what if we try and bring everybody together to one conference so we hear each other and learn from each other and really embrace that partnership is what it takes to be successful in any kind of urban forestry work. So we started the Partners in Community Forestry Conference, and I will tell you, it is my favorite forestry conference to get to go to. Not just because we put it on, but I never go to a more diverse conference of profession, of age, of gender, of ethnicity. The vibrancy of the urban and community forestry community is like none other. And it is a dynamic group of people with all kinds of current content about what's working in communities. Here are some lessons of success that you can steal or borrow to take back to your city. Some of the latest research that's coming out, lessons about how to work in environmental justice, lessons in how to recruit and manage volunteers. It is one of those great conferences that it's not just about theory, it's about action. And it's a really positive experience as well. So I look forward to it every single year. It's in Chicago, Illinois this year. Historically amazing urban forestry city. Some amazing research has been done there over the years. And then, like every city, they've had their challenges, but it's going to be a showcase city. The tours that we have available, I want to go on every single one of them. And we're going to be right downtown Chicago, middle of November. I promise the weather is going to be perfect for us, but it's going to be great. We'll have probably over 800 people there from all across the country and around the world talking about what's going on in urban and community forestry today.
That's very exciting. Yeah, the list of tours really gets you out of the loop and down to the south side, over to the west side, some of the amazing innovations that are going on for greening in the underserved communities.
Well, I'll also say that, so the Partners of Community Forestry Conference is on Wednesday and Thursday, the 20th and 21st, but earlier in the week, there's also a one-day conferences for the Alliance for Community Trees, which is a network of more than 200 nonprofit volunteer organizations from around the country that have a very dynamic day of learning and sharing. That gets almost 200 people to come. And then also the Urban and Community Forestry Society, which used to be called the Society of Municipal Arborists, as their annual conference adjacent to the Partners in Community Forestry Conference. They've got a fantastic lineup as well. And so there are these side events that then everybody folds into the Partners in Community Forestry Conference. And it's a real treat to hear what's going on around the country. It's so cool to hear about the innovation, the dreams, the challenges, and how people are overcoming the challenges in their cities. And then what it is, it's about hearing other people, sharing, and then going home with new, renewed spirit and enthusiasm after you get to hang out with 800 of your closest friends in urban and community forestry.
And Hal, you're going to be going home because that's where you're from, Chicago.
That is my hometown. Yes, I left it 40 plus years ago, but I was there last month. And yeah, I'm a sentimental guy. And every time I'm back there, I get a little heartsick.
It is truly a world-class city.
It is.
With amazing food too. So
Oh, it
people
does.
aren't going to go hungry. Yeah.
We've had a couple conferences that I went to there, and it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful place.
And we'll be right downtown too. So it'll be really accessible. And it's all, Chicago does a great job of making people feel safe and welcome in those events. And so it's a cool deal. I'll look forward to seeing you there.
Excellent. So I want to take our conversation with you. I don't want to say to a dark place, Dan, but I had the opportunity to receive a text through my sister who has a lot of roots and a lot of friends down in North Carolina. And it struck me in this day and age of our smartphone reliance that texting is actually another new portal for getting boots on the ground kind of news. So if you'll indulge me, I have this text. I've edited it for brevity quite a bit. A young man, I'm assuming a young man of a certain age who is probably a writer and might very well be an arborist, sent this out, and he lives outside of Asheville, North Carolina. So I thought we'd have a listen to this and then switch over a little bit and talk a little bit more about the foundation's work as we come to grips with what's going on with climate. He says, "Greetings all. We haven't had a cell call signal since Amy and I were cut off mid-conversation Friday afternoon. Mom and Dad are well, as am I. I made it to see them at Deerfield Friday night. On Saturday morning, most of the staff was stranded there, and now they're working 24 to 36-hour shifts. Angels, every one of them. It's truly devastating out there. Snapped trees and telephone poles everywhere. And we have not experienced any of the flooding in Biltmore Forest, but someone showed me pictures today of the French Broad through the River Arts District and beyond. The Smoky Park Supper Club and Salvage Station are completely wiped out. From 4 to 7 a.m. Friday morning, I sat in the den without power with the dogs, Betty and Paca. About once a minute, I could hear that heartbreaking sound of a tree snapping or falling. Every now and then, I could tell it was falling on a house. I just knew it was going to be devastating, if not apocalyptic. At 7:30 daybreak, I took the perhaps risky option of gearing up and going to survey our neighborhood. It was just past peak wind and still going, so most of my time was looking up to make sure nothing was falling towards me. I interacted with several neighbors. One had a car under 4 trees that seemed destined to crush it. I encouraged them to move it, and 2 minutes later, those trees came down, right where it was parked. Gutsy stuff. No power or any form of communication for 2 full days. So I'm taking advantage of this midnight cell signal to let you know we're okay. It seems as if 1 out of every 20 trees in Biltmore Forest are down, mainly giant oaks and white pines. All the power they've been saving up as they get to be nearly 80 or 100 years old is unleashed as they fall. Many homes and cars crushed, many lucky near misses. I got on the tractor Friday with my chainsaw at my feet and opened up Ridgefield and then Hilltop. Took over about 3 or 4 hours. All of the news was word of mouth, heartening to be closely connected to community. Closer to sunset, another neighbor had the Georgia-Alabama game on in her driveway via a generator, and we all decided to just kick back and drink a bit. It seemed like the old COVID days in our neighborhood. It's nice to know that deep down, people are resilient. The dogs and the kids had a blast today.
Yeah.
That was a tough one to read.
I could tell. I could tell.
Luckily, I'm in touch with my emotions.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it was amazing to watch, and amazing because we got the projections of how hard and bad it was going to be, and to hear that story and some of the other stories and to see some of the pictures. It's impossible for me to even think about what it must have been like to live through it and now to deal with the recovery.
I got a letter like that last night from my cousin. She's married into the family. She sent a letter from her sister, and it was similar, a little bit more wrenching because of people that were actually finding bodies, and it's just very, very sad. And people don't realize how important our environment is until the environment kicks back at us and creates events like this. And I think we just need to be more aware of our surroundings, how we treat it, where we put ourselves and what kind of precarious positions we build our homes in, how we build our highways. I saw the one picture where the guy went to look for the highway and it was full of boulders. There was no sign of the highway at all. And he said, there's a highway under there. He goes, I don't know where, but there's a highway under there. And that's the kind of thing that you just think about all the time. And organizations like yours are making people conscious of what we need to think about, what we need to be doing. And that nurturing and that celebration is part of even the catastrophic events that we just saw. That people will come through, they're resilient, but it's having to go through that's so dramatic. And I can imagine that your organization has seen a lot too and can share that kind of information.
Yeah, I will tell you, we're all seeing the increasing frequency and severity of these natural disasters. And it is, of course, having an impact on life and shelter and access to the necessities of power and food. And I will say that there has never been a more important time for the work we do. Like if ever there was a time for trees, now is that time. And it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to end hurricanes and tornadoes and other natural disasters like that. But they're an important part of helping to combat. And right now, I will tell you, when these kinds of disasters strike, our phone starts to ring because there's an expectation that the Arbor Day Foundation is going to be there to help with recovery. And it's our members who call. It's other individuals who just have an expectation of the Arbor Day Foundation being ready to support. And we get calls from our friends in state forestry and city forestry asking how we might be able to be there to bring hope, healing, and recovery back, literally bring life back to some of these neighborhoods and communities. And of course, it can be years before some of these communities are even ready to rebuild and then replant. But ever since Katrina, when Katrina came through, I think it was in 2005, we got calls from Mississippi and Texas, and they said, how can we work together to bring trees back? So that's when we started what we call our Community Tree Recovery Program. And ever since then, we have helped to distribute and plant millions of trees as we work with local professional arborists, ISA arborists, state accredited arborists. We work with state forestry, cities, nonprofits to figure out what to plant, when to plant, how to bring that hope, optimism, and the benefits of trees back to these communities. And it is some of the most emotional stuff we have ever gotten to be a part of. I've shown up for some of those tree distributions in places like Panama City after Hurricane Michael has swept through. I went to Tuscaloosa after the tornado of 2007-ish, I think, swept through there. People line up by the hundreds to get a chance to get a tree and take it home and put their roots back down and make a difference and restore those natural landmarks in their community. So again, Hal, I appreciate you sharing that. I can't imagine what people are going through in North Carolina and elsewhere, but the Arbor Day Foundation will absolutely be a part of helping with restoration and recovery.
So number one, you're like the Red Cross for trees.
In a way, yeah. You know, the Red
Green
Cross.
Hey, maybe that could be.
Right. Yeah. And we got to be really careful not to start knocking on people's doors when they're dealing with the most important things. Mm-hmm. But boy, we cannot forget how important trees are in the holistic recovery. The other thing I'll say is what's so sad is 6 months from now, there'll be another, or 2 months, there'll be another disaster. 3 months, there'll be another disaster. And people forget. And what we've really strived to do is come year after year, because it takes years for this kind of recovery to happen. And while sometimes those disasters can be forgotten, we need to be there for year after year to bring new trees in, help these homeowners who are just rebuilding and have sometimes been forgotten. And that's something we're committed to doing. And we've got great partners who help us do it.
Well, you know, we had a tornado here in 2001 and not too far from my home. And it devastated the university where I used to work, the campus. It was the Horticulture and Landscape Architecture Department, 2021. And the first thing that these people did, the one group in Fort Washington, called Morris Arboretum and asked if they could have somebody come to talk to them about the trees, because the first thing they wanted to do was plant trees. And they said that it was the fastest tree planting that has ever happened that they know of after a tornado. They were so mind-boggled that when they looked at their landscape and they couldn't put anchors to where they were. They couldn't put that relationship to their location without the trees there. And so that was the first thing that, you know, when I went and helped do planting with tree tenders from the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society, and they gave out trees, and people were so thrilled to get those trees. I couldn't believe the emotion that was involved with it. And if you could plant trees, the tears would have actually watered them, because that's how much emotion was there. It was unbelievable.
I've seen it. People have an emotional connection to trees. You know it. You've seen it. And when you see it in these disaster zones and the eagerness for people to bring that life back to the communities, it really is something else. And it doesn't matter what your background is. I was just in Shreveport, Louisiana last year after their storm with no name, which was basically a derecho of some sort, wiped out a whole bunch of canopy. The socioeconomic divide, the gender divide, it didn't matter. People were lined up by the hundreds because they all want to be a part of healthy, thriving communities, which they know have trees. It's exciting. It's cool. It's just also this reminder that with all the divisiveness we have in the world, and especially in our country, trees are the one thing that everybody can agree on. And it unites neighbors. It connects communities, connects cultures. And I just couldn't be more proud and humbled to get to be a part of that community.
It's actually the fabric of our country. It just makes us a really nice big blanket, that nice comfy blanket. That's what I think of trees when I see them. I think of that, just that feeling of being surrounded by wonderful energy.
One positive development, additional wisdom, if you will, is that as we talk about planting trees in the underserved communities, and here in Philly, I always say I'm about a mile from where the neighborhoods really start to struggle and things really change in terms of the urban landscape. But understanding racism in urban forestry, and that low-income homeowners or residents will push back on trees. And I'm glad that that conversation is being had. Clearly, canopy has to be installed, maintained, invigorated, but it has to have community buy-in. And, looking at it through the eyes of someone that loves trees, and as an arborist, I'll say, and the solution will probably be smaller trees, but, we want to work with you and not shove these trees at you despite your protests, because there's costs associated.
That's a great point, Hal. The Arbor Day Foundation does a lot of work in cities and towns, planting trees in underserved and disadvantaged communities that don't have a lot of tree canopy, or healthy tree canopy, I should say. And you are 100% correct that the only way to do it that's going to work long term is to earn the respect, build authentic relationships, listen to what the community members are interested in. We can't just parachute in and say, "Lucky you, we're here to plant trees." We can't do that. It doesn't work. And because people they don't want to take, they don't want messy trees. They don't want to take up their parking spots. They don't have the funding to pay for care, as you point out. I had a great experience years ago, shortly after I began my career at the Arbor Day Foundation. Go down to Little Havana in Miami. We were celebrating the Super Bowl, doing this great tree planting project in Little Havana. And it was this Cuban community. It was beautiful. They didn't have a lot of trees, but the city had done a fantastic job of going door to door, talking to the neighbors. What kind of trees would you be interested in? And a lot of them wanted fruit-bearing trees. And so it was just a great lesson that it's their forest. And so how are we building a forest that they're going to have buy-in for and want to care for? And there's more and more of that going on today. I will say the urban and community forestry community is embracing how to do that the right way. And it's been really exciting to see the new audiences, the new advocates for trees showing up across the country.
It's the new models that really make a difference. Once you know that there's a proven way to do something, you're going to replicate that over and over and over again. I like the door knocking. I think that's great. And fruit trees, yes, of course. People who are in low-income areas, and even people that are not in low-income areas, love fruit.
Yeah.
Why not?
It was a great eye opener for me, and we see it more and more today. Really thoughtful engagement of neighbors, all types, figuring out how do we build an urban forest for them.
So when I was doing a little bit of background, Dan, just to get to know you, obviously through the internet, you gave a great interview. I think it was just last year for an event that I think you co-sponsored with the utility industry. And it kind of made me remember a podcast I'd listened to about decarbonizing the U.S. economy and weaving in the infrastructure money that is starting to become available and government's commitment of about $450 billion to reach this goal. I found it kind of positive and enlightening that this power grid is a thing that not only is not going to go away, but it's going to grow. That solar and wind, bring it on, but the grid has to be out there to deliver energy. It's like utility industry 101 for me. I'm a little slow on the uptake. Nevertheless, I liked your interview. I liked the energy, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the Arbor Day Foundation's relationship with the utility industry.
Sure, happy to, Hal. Utility companies are not some of the most popular people in the tree community, although we have a long history of working with utilities, because I'm not sure anybody touches more trees around the country than utilities do. And
Yeah.
they have to, because it is this relationship where we have to figure out how to create an environment where we can have trees and utilities, not trees or utilities. We want safe, reliable electricity and energy, and we need healthy, vibrant, thriving urban and community forests. And they have to work together. So we have found it to be most instructive to work with the utility community to think about trenching and tunneling, to think about proper pruning, proper planting techniques, how to educate people about right tree in the right place. If you don't want to see your tree cut down or pruned in a really unusual way, don't plant it under a utility line. And there's loads of work to do, but it's really an important community for us to be engaging because they are impacting our urban forests. They're impacting our forests, period. Because as much as people want to complain about trees being cut down or pruned by utility companies, the complaints about when their air conditioner doesn't work or their refrigerator power is going off or they can't watch the ball game because they don't have TV. I mean, you can't have it both ways. And so there's plenty of challenges out there. The Arbor Day Foundation tries to bring a solution-oriented approach to the conversations. We can point fingers of blame, but instead, why don't we just try and find solutions where we can work together in harmony? And so that's what we do. And it's great. We have a program called Tree Line USA, where we recognize electric utilities who meet core standards of tree care, tree-based energy conservation, customer communication, key standards to make sure that they're doing it in the right way. And then we do co-host a conference every year called Trees and Utilities, where we are striving to push the utility industry to embrace the value of trees in energy demand side reduction, all that kind of important stuff. So it's an important part of the urban forest.
That's a really good point. I like that you're working with them instead of against them. I mean, because a lot of times it's headbutting and, it's always better to be proactive than reactive. And, kudos to your organization for being able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work still to do because there's a heck of a lot of trees and a lot of utility lines. And as Hal mentioned, it's just growing. Mm-hmm. As our population grows, as our development continues to spread in our cities and towns, and it's in our traditional forest lands also. And thankfully, we have found the utility community to be very receptive to, and it's particularly the utility arborist community to be particularly receptive to figuring out how to get it right.
That's great.
Yeah. ISA has been very committed. I know they have a credential apart from certified arborists to be an accredited utility arborist. Like you say, a big part of it is educating the citizens so that they don't have to endure the heartbreak of a hard pruning job because, we all like to see a properly pruned tree, but then you talk to a utility arborist and they will calmly say, look, we can't be here to prune this tree every year. We have to prune this tree so that we're back in 5 years. So that, there's a lot going into the calculation on the scheduling.
Which reminds me that one of our arborist friends, she was a utility specialist. She's now teaching. She put out on Facebook, please, if you see a down power line, don't go near it. And I just thought, that's great. And then there was another guy who came on and said the same thing. So it was two different Facebook groups giving information about power lines. And I thought, oh, this is fantastic. I've never seen this done before during a major storm, but they were both in the Carolinas. And I thought, this is fantastic that they're doing that.
Yeah. The International Society of Arboriculture has been a great voice in that. The Utility Arborist Association has been a wonderful partner as well. And again, it's a testament to the profession of the arborist community. The arborist community is championing how to do things the right way and how to build bridges to create win-win scenarios. And at the Arbor Day Foundation, we feel very fortunate to get to be working with that profession at a time when the sophistication, the awareness, the education has never been higher than it is.
That's good to hear.
So I'd like to end on a tree nerd approach here, since we've covered the big topics, many of them fairly somber and existential. But Dan, you grew up in Lincoln, and I would just like to hear about Nebraska and trees that grow out there. If you can tell us a little bit about your favorite tree. And what was it like growing up around all those shelter belts? Because I started to look at images and I thought, man, this is very interesting. Look at these beautiful fields under cultivation that happen to be carefully protected by shelter belts that were planted during the Roosevelt administration.
Yeah, we could really nerd out for a while on this topic, Hal,
yes.
and that would be fine with me. But in Nebraska, it is true that when you're driving across Nebraska, you're not seeing hallways of trees like you do when you're out in the east and northeast and the south. But as you're driving along and you're across these farm fields and you see a pocket of trees, there's usually a house there. And those trees are strategically planted on the north side. You don't even need a compass. You can know those trees were planted to be a windbreak for those farmhouses. As a kid, I didn't think about any of that stuff. The shelter belts you mentioned, how I would drive across to the old family farm into central Nebraska. I didn't think about those as shelter belts. They were kind of playscapes for me to run out with my cousins and play in the farm fields and find the trees to climb. But it's true. And if being in Lincoln, Nebraska, you don't think about a lot of trees, but our state capital is about 5 blocks from me down the road here. I think it's 380 feet tall, which if I'm not mistaken, is about the height of the tallest tree in the U.S. And we love to tell school kids around here that, can you imagine a tree that tall? But when you go to the top of the Capitol and you look across the city, it's just an amazing urban forest. It's just beautiful. It's a fantastic urban forest. And you can see it from that elevation. So like every city, there's really unique things about trees, and every state the same way. But the tree that I often talk about, Hal, is where I grew up on South 39th Street in Lincoln, Nebraska. We had an enormous pin oak tree in our front yard. We had a modest neighborhood, but my mom, I told you how she kind of implanted that tree planter ethic in us. She would proudly tell all kinds of people that she bought that house because of that pin oak tree.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And again, as a kid growing up, I didn't realize it was strategically in our front yard. We had a west-facing house so we could keep our air conditioning turned down. It would shade the entire home all summer long. The games my siblings and friends and I would play with, the thousands of acorns that fell. The branches stretched across our entire front lawn. And it was the biggest tree in our landscape. And I just completely took it for granted as a kid. But as I've gotten older and appreciated the trees, and to hear my mom talk about it, it was always really fun to just know how impactful that was in her life, and thus my life. So I like to think about that tree's still there, still doing great. No one in the family lives in that house anymore, but I still drive by it sometimes just to take a peek at it and make sure it's still shading that home.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, it's a great tree. Beautiful tree.
You're talking about the direction, just to add a little bit to the direction of how trees are planted. Here in the East, the old farmhouses would always have trees on the west side, and the houses would be built north-south, the shortest side facing north and south, so that in the spring and summer, you would have your doors, both doors open, because the wind could pass through the house, and you'd have your deciduous trees on the west side of the house, and you had virtually no trees on the east side, so you can get the early spring sunshine, maybe lower trees, smaller trees on the front. But that's how they planted. All the farms around here were planted that way because they really were conscious of that, the whole idea of sustainability.
Yeah.
They didn't call it sustainability. They just called it practical.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was practical.
Yeah.
So
good housekeeping.
That's great.
Can anyone tell me what species the shelter belts favored?
No. Can you?
I don't know. Eva?
Oh,
Professor?
the trees that are in the shelter belts?
Yeah, what kind of trees?
I would imagine they would be mixed wood. I mean, mixed,
It was always mixed. We have a lot of cottonwoods here in those shelter belts. I mean, they would grow well and tall and, all kinds.
Birches and maybe tulip trees, maybe some hickories or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We see a lot of silver maples around here, too.
Silver maples. Yeah, we have a lot of those, too, especially in the wetland.
Hackberries.
Hackberry. Yeah, and it's really interesting. I was teaching that plant this week at Longwood, and we don't really have a lot of hackberries. The first one I ever saw around here was at the readouts in Valley Forge, George Washington's site that he kept his troops. It was never a battlefield, but it was a safe haven. And it was the largest hackberry. That was the first. And I was like blown away by the size of the trunk. It was enormous. And it hasn't been until recently that they started planting hackberries along our city streets because they wanted to have a greater diversity. But the seeds are really important for migrating birds. And I was like, wow, look at the bark on this. Look, Longwood just planted one a couple years ago, and they have a really nice one planted on one part of the property that I took them to, and go, look at all the bugs on here. There's, lots of spots on the leaves, but they are really good for birds and all kinds of other animals because they attract so many different types of bugs and insects. It's a really interesting tree.
The New York Times wrote up hackberry week before last. That was a Margaret Renke column coming out of her hometown in Nashville. And I guess in the South, they're regarded as a trash tree. But I've always thought they were really stately, understated. They're not going to blow you away with fall color. But the two in my neighborhood are really soldiers in terms of the amount of growth they put out, whether it's drought conditions or not.
Well, what you made me think of as you were talking, I don't know what triggered it with me, but, I talked about my upbringing really being raised with parents who love trees, but I'm not an arborist. I mean, I've learned a heck of a lot over the years, but I'm not an arborist. And as I started at the Arbor Day Foundation, I've had my background in nonprofit work, but I've gotten to do such amazing things, including some early tree inventories in a small town of Sterling, Nebraska, with Nebraska State Forestry. Sit in the back of a pickup truck, driving around a small town doing a tree inventory where there were hackberries and silver maples. And it was so fascinating. I've had these amazing, unique opportunities to see arborists in action, see volunteer tree boards and others in action, see some of the most sophisticated communities. Like last week, I literally got to plant trees in New York City in Riverside Park, and it was going to be an amazing new park. I get to do all of this really cool stuff. I'm not an arborist, but to see how, whether it's in Australia or whether it's in Madrid or whether it's in New York City or Sterling, Nebraska, there's purpose to it, there's thoughtfulness to it, and people just care so much about what those trees are going to do for their communities and their forests. So what you made me think of, and it's just a reminder that I'm really grateful to get to do this.
Who would have ever thought political science would have brought you that far?
Not my professors, I promise.
Hey, science
Actually,
was in the name. You never know. And that's why we like asking people how they got started, because, people think that they have to start a certain way, but there is no certain way. It just comes to you. And I really do believe that people are drawn to where they're supposed to be. And as a political science major, you are working politically speaking, you're working with municipalities. And so you really are working with what you trained to do, except for you have the tree hook in there. And that's the science end of things.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that within the forestry world, I think that people who work in forestry, whether it's urban and community forestry, whether it's traditional forest management or timber management, that sort of thing, I feel like there's traits, some common traits of service and legacy, like having legacy, and there's a curiosity around the science of it. And I find some common traits across the communities. One of the other big traits I see in the forestry community is humility. We're almost too humble, to be honest with you. We're almost too humble as a community. The work we're doing is incredibly important, but it's a sign of it's we're about paying it forward, doing things because it's the right thing to do. And I like being with those people. And you see that in the forestry community all around the world. There are some real common traits you see.
Well, I can attest to that because I tried asking one of the foresters to come on to the podcast, and he says, nope, I'm too shy. I talk to trees, and I have a real hard time talking with people. And I thought, okay, that's really a good line. But, it's true. They're very humble people.
Yeah.
Eva did make a good point, though, Dan, your political science background, because when we're amongst tree lovers, it's all beautiful. But when we have to cross that gulf a little bit to the political energy and governments where we live, that's when it has to get so nuanced. And that's where we have to become tree explainers. Every city, and we haven't even touched on the fact that as we wrap this up, that Arbor Day Foundation is an international organization. So I'm sure there's a lot of stories, good and bad, that you could tell about how your interactions with local governments have gone. But we'll save that for next time.
Okay. I will look forward to it. We'll have our international session next time.
Well, and we are an international podcast, and we're in 110 countries, something like that. And I think it's really important that people hear from around the world what other people are doing. I think it's really critical because it's a global problem, our climate crisis. It brings us together talking about nature and talking about trees.
Yeah.
And we're so delighted that you could be on our podcast. We really are.
Yeah, Dan.
Well, I'm flattered and appreciative. And it's fun to talk about the fun parts of trees and to acknowledge the challenging things that are happening in our world. But again, solution-oriented, how trees can help be a part of the solution.
And so the conference is the Partners in Community Forestry, Chicago, Illinois, November 18 to 21. It's downtown at the Palmer House. So if you enjoyed this episode, hustle over to the Arbor Day Foundation website, easy to find, and sign up, and we'll see you there.
Yeah, thank you. I can't wait to see you there.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We wish you all the best.
Great to be with you. Thanks so much for what you're doing.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The Plant a Trillion Trees podcast is edited by Andromedan Recordings in Hollywood, California.